It was on pause. Okay, you guys should see the recording icon, right? It shows it's
Yes.
recording.
Yep.
My screen's completely different than yours. Okay, so I'm gonna leave the share up for now until we pop in, and then I'll take it down. So we are gonna go live.
I'd love to hear more from Hunter sometime about what he does to, like, what's his, what does he do for work?
Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, you guys can have, Hunter, you want to
Yeah, sure.
real fast? You've got a minute.
So yeah, I do traffic for TPW. I review like land development projects, and then do traffic analysis for different things on our roads. But I'm moving to our design group, and I have managed the grants for TPW, although that's shifting over to somebody we just hired. But I'm retaining the project management aspect of this project. So
Great.
yeah.
All right, so we're going to go live. It's 2 o'clock. 5, 4, 3. Okay. Welcome, everybody. Come on in to the structural hardening webinar you've all been waiting for on the edge of your seat, even more so than the current elections. So hopefully this isn't cutting into your following of the election and what's going on there. So yeah, I know I'm on the edge of my seat. So Rachel, welcome. Sharon, welcome. Fred, come on in. I'm watching people come in now on my screen, my list of participants. And then once that starts to fill out, then we'll dive into the meat and potatoes of the presentation. So we'll give it a couple minutes for folks to come in so I know everybody's in here who's going to be here. So yeah, so 7 people in here now. Dale, come on in. Looking for anybody I know personally. Let's see. How do I pronounce that? I'm not going to try. Linda, come on in. Brad, welcome. Come on in, you guys. Give it another minute and then we'll dive into this. Okay, let's link in that. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing now. We'll switch over to our panelists and we'll get going here. Actually, I can probably go to there real quick while we finish populating. You know, this is supposed to be an inspirational quote to get everybody motivated to get out and do some structural hardening work on their homes. Okay, so, oopsies, I gotta do that. Okay. All right, so let me close that. Okay. So, yeah, so everybody here with us today is myself. I'm Roberta McIntyre. I'm president and CEO of Fire Safe Sonoma. And my bio's on, I think, the webinar information if you want to get into more detail there. With us today is Stuart Mitchell. He's our guest panelist. He's co-presenting this with me. He's a wildland mitigation specialist certified. And then we have Hunter McLaughlin, who is with Sonoma County Transportation and Sonoma County Transportation and Public Works. Oh my gosh. And then Kayla Notch is working with Fire Safe Sonoma. She's a Civic Spark Fellow working with Fire Safe Sonoma, helping us out today. All right, so we only have 8 people in the room, but we're still gonna move forward, hoping more people pop in as we go. Okay, so I'm gonna switch back over to actually, do you guys each want to introduce yourselves real quick in more detail? So while I have it on, full on people view, and then we'll get into the presentation. So Hunter, why don't you go next?
Yeah, so thank you, Roberta. So I'm Hunter McLaughlin. I'm a junior engineer in the traffic land development and design section of TPW.
And Stuart, how about you?
Yeah, my name is Stuart Mitchell. I'm a certified wildfire mitigation specialist through the NFPA, which is the National Fire Protection Association. And I've been subcontracting with Fire Safe Sonoma on the TPW project and other grants. And I'm also doing it privately and also subcontracting with another company that's based here locally.
Perfect. And Kaylin, you're doing all the heavy lifting behind the scenes for us. Well,
Hi, I'm Kaylin Notch. I'm a Civic Spark AmeriCorps Fellow. I'm working in between Fire Safe Sonoma and the Gold Ridge Resource Conservation District, working primarily on wildfire prevention and outreach efforts in Sonoma County.
Perfect. All right. Thank you, guys. So I still see people coming in the room, which is good. So I'm going to go ahead and start. And I'm going to do what they call screen share or share screen. And we'll dive into our presentation. Okay. So once again, there's that quote you guys saw earlier. So this is part 3 of our 3-part series that we're doing on wild and urban interface, or actually the 3-part series globally is on, wild and fire safety philosophies. And it includes defensible space practices and structural hardening practices in projects. And this is the 3rd one where we focus on the structural hardening component of it. So that's what this is. Hopefully you guys all saw the first 2. If you didn't, the first one we did is available through our website. And then the one we did on the home ignition zone, I don't think we have that up yet. I have to do a little more post-production and then we'll get that out to you. So the format is we'll do about an hour presentation followed by a question and answer period. There's one caveat to that. We are going to have Hunter talk about the project that supports our work here. And he's not going to be here for the whole presentation. So we'll have Hunter talk about his piece of this. And then if you have any questions for Hunter, we'll field those questions. And then we'll dive into the meat and potatoes of the presentation on structural hardening. We are recording. Yes, we are recording. Good. We typically don't put the recordings out when we do this immediately. What we usually do is we do a little post-production to the recording after we record them. So we take out anything that is date specific so we can use the recording of the presentation as a standalone presentation. So if you look at it a year from now, it'll make sense to you. And we still keep the bulk of the Q&A unless it's something not relevant to the conversation particularly, or if it's, date specific. The chat, we use the chat component of the webinar system or the webinar application to share information back and forth. Like if we're going through the presentation and something comes up with regard to a specific website, Kaylin in the background could go find that. She could put a link to a website in the chat. So that's how we use the chat. If you all want to use the chat to talk back and forth to each other and have dialogue that way, that's perfectly fine as well. I just want to let you know that the Q&A section of the webinar application is where we're going to pull the questions. When we go to the Q&A and start looking at questions and answering them, that's where we're going to pull from. So if you have a question, please put it in the Q&A rather than the chat. And also with regard to questions, as we go along, if you have a question, don't wait till after the presentation to put your question in the Q&A. Put it in there right away. So it'll be kind of like in the queue there, in the parking lot, as I like to call it. And then when we get to Q&A, we'll just pull it up and talk about it. And then just so you guys all know, the way the presentation is set up for me is this area here where I have the cursor. It is the, right here, I call this like dead space or safe area. When we do the recording, our faces actually end up in this space. So, that's just what's going on now. If you're concerned or curious about the architecture of the presentation. Okay, so let's see, let's do this. All right, so the presenters, we did that already. Hunter's here with us Transportation and Public Works with Sonoma County. There's me, Stuart's here, and Kaylin's here handling all the heavy lifting behind the scenes. All right, so I'm going to turn it over to Hunter, and he's going to talk to you or give you, like the Reader's Digest version of the I call it the TPW project, but it's actually called the Northwest Roadway Safety, Fuels Reduction, and Community Chipper and Engagement Project. That's the full title. Now you know how to call it the TPW project. But Hunter will give you kind of the 411 on the project, how it got started. And then he'll also mention, Fire Safe Sonoma's role within the scope of the entire huge, gigantic project. So Hunter, go ahead.
Thank you, Roberta. Yes, it is a mouthful. So yeah, we received this grant back in 2018, late 2018, and this is part of the California Climate Investment through CAL FIRE. And so as part of this project, we partnered with Fire Safe Sonoma, Permit Sonoma Fire Prevention, California State Parks, and PG&E has also helped out in the project. And so there are 3 different parts to the project. Permit Sonoma Fire Prevention is doing the chipper and the community chipper program. And so within the project areas, which include Cazadero, Guerneville, Monterey, Rio Nito, Timber Cove, Fort Ross, and now Occidental and Camp Meeker. So all of those areas in between them, as you can see on the screen, anybody within those areas can get take advantage of the free chipper program that Fire Prevention is doing as part of this project. And so I encourage everybody to take advantage of that. And then the second component is what Fire Safe Sonoma is working on, which is they include home assessments and outreach at different events, which has become rather difficult with COVID, but they're still trucking along. And then these webinars or workshops that have now gone into webinars. And so this is the part. And so I encourage everybody to take advantage of the home assessments. You can contact Fire Safe Sonoma and they'll come out and do an assessment of your home. And then after, you can do the treatment and then take advantage of the chipper program. So hopefully everybody will do that. The last part is the roadside fuels reduction. So within this initial project area, there are 83 miles of county road. And so myself and somebody from the fire prevention at Permit Sonoma drove these roads and selected 30 miles of road to be have like an arborist survey along them. And then from that, we selected the different roads. Those roads were selected by like evacuation routes and the CAL FIRE map for their danger for fire danger along the different roads. And so we selected the road segments for that. And so it's about 22 miles, I believe, different types of treatment. And so that project for the fuel reduction, and then there's also the removal of dead, dying, and hazardous trees along the roads. And so that project will hopefully will go into construction this December is our hope. So in the next month or two, that will be starting.
And
so
then, yeah, I just want to toss out there, remind folks that, the effort that's TPW is doing in these areas that is really related to improving the evacuation routes in these areas. That's why these roadways were targeted, to get as most bang for the buck as they can get in, making these evacuation routes a little safer, cleaning up the vegetation along those routes to allow you folks to get out there and evacuate when you need to.
Exactly, yeah, that's our goal. So hopefully we can do as much as we can with the amount that CAL FIRE has given us. So
yeah, so if you guys live, along these roads that are in the orange, or if you're within this island here in the middle, or if you live in the Occidental CSD area or Camp Meeker, you know, those areas, you're eligible to get a free home assessment by one of our contractors like Stewart. And, you know, they, you know, let us know if you want that, if you live in the project area. We still have plenty of funding to get a lot more of those completed. The life of the project ends the end of season next year, right, Hunter?
Yeah, the full project ends in March of 2022. So next year is kind of the last year. So get it in as soon as possible.
Yeah, so, and we are offering those, the home assessment service or resource throughout the year. So, you know, it doesn't have to be during the summer months. So if you know, so we could certainly spread those out. So also with regard to chipping, the county, I understand that Sonoma County's curbside chipper project has been extended into this month to allow for work specific to these project areas. So if you like, for the cool step-by-step I see is, you know, if you have Stuart come out and do a home assessment and he identifies some fuels treatment that you might need to do, and you actually do those fuel treatments, then and you end up with piles of brush, you call the Sonoma County's curbside chipper program, and then they'll send some folks out with their chipper crew to grind up all of the materials that you just created by doing your awesome job of, you know, making your defensible space better. So that's, I'm gonna go back up to this other screen just for a second to make sure that you all can see that project area. So also, if you live on these roadways in the project area, I'm hoping you got a postcard from us talking about the project. We did our last direct mailing, I think, end of last week. So, you know, if you haven't received a postcard yet, likely you still will, as slow as the post office has been lately, you know, a lot, probably because of the vote by mail stuff. So, but regardless of whether you got a postcard or not, if you live in these project footprint areas, then and you want that service, let us know. You know, we'll take care of it. So at this point, I'm going to open it up for questions for Hunter. If anybody has any questions for Hunter, Kaylin.
I have a question.
Oh yeah, Stuart, go ahead.
Hey Hunter, thanks for being here. Regarding the chipping, does a resident have to complete the assessment first before getting chipping done? And also, how do they reach, what's the link or the contact for the chipping program?
Sure. So yeah, no, there's no requirement that they have to do the home assessment prior to the chipping. They can just be doing the removal and have a pile and they want it removed or chipped. So yeah, and then the place to go, you go to SoCo Report It, which I would imagine if you Google that and then fill out that report, it will send that over to the fire prevention so they can get that request.
I think Kaylin's already on it. She's putting that in.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you.
And then how and where should the people put the chipping material?
I believe it should be close to like a road or someplace that they can access that the chipper could drive next to, like a paved area or something, is my understanding. But the chipper crews at fire prevention would be able to answer that better than I would be able to. Okay. I'm not completely sure.
Yeah, when I was the fire marshal, I ran that project, and the materials that you need to be chipped ideally are in, you know, not gigantic piles, so no more than a, you know, 2-3 cubic yards. And they can't do like a whole field. So the chipping that is done has to be specific to your defensible space. So if you've got a bunch of vineyards and you've got piles of stuff left from your vineyard and you expect the county to come out and chip that up, not going to happen. So it has to be specific to your defensible space effort. And they are limited in terms of the amount of time they can spend with each project. So if you can imagine the scope of work that you create for the chipper crew with your piles, just figure that they probably won't be there for more than a couple hours. So, you know, don't overwhelm these guys. And then you have to have room for the truck and chipper machine to access your piles. Generally, that means close to the roadside or a turnout or something like that. Don't make it challenging. I actually, when I was a fire marshal, went out with the chipper and drove it myself. And we got into some places that were just crazy to get to. So make it easy for those guys. And the last thing I want to say about that is that also with regard to where you put your piles and imagine where the chipper equipment is going to go, remember that they're not taking the chips back with them. So you want to identify or know ahead of time the area on your property where you want the chips to be placed. And the chipper machine can throw those things with some precision. So depending on where they're able to park the chipper machine, they can oftentimes point those chips and get them to land in a pile where you want them, or even by kind of curving the nozzle of the chipper machine, they can, instead of one giant pile, they can carefully kind of spread it out a little bit for you to save some work there. But so that's kind of how that works.
Good. That's really good information. I did have a client up there in Camp Meeker actually who had some material that wasn't close enough. It seemed quite close to me, but depending on the vehicle that they were, the truck that's there and whatnot. So having the branches aimed in a way that the people who are loading the material into the chipper can access it is really important, and where it's placed is important.
Yeah, I'll share with you real quick the story related to that. When we first started the project, we got a pickup and a chipper machine through a Pacific Gas and Electric grant. We were able to purchase the equipment in the early days. And I underspec'd the pickup. And so one of the things we had to do, because of some of the spots we were trying to put that chipper machine, was very challenging. So what we ended up doing is we actually put a trailer hitch on the front of the vehicle, so that in some places when we got to them, we could disconnect the chipper machine and hook it up to the front of the vehicle and push it into a spot. We don't want the chipper crews to have to do that. We learned from my experience. And so just be aware, imagine yourself, if you're going to go down and rent a chipper machine from the rental company, where are you going to put it? Don't make it hard. Because if it's challenging, these guys are going to go, sorry, we can't do it, and they'll move on. So, okay. Any other questions for Hunter in the queue, Kaylin?
Not specific to Hunter. I was just going to say that Fire Safe Marin has a good resource about how to put a chipper pile together, which I'll put in the chat. And then someone has a question about wood chips and their flammability, which we can ask now, or I can hold that depending on what you think, Roberta.
I'll just hit it now since we're talking about chips.
Yeah, okay. So
go ahead.
So Carolyn's asking, regarding wood chips, since they're flammable, aren't they a fire risk? How do you suggest storing them and using them in landscaping?
Okay, so the first part is don't put them in your non-combustible zone or your ignition-free zone, or the 0 to 5 or 10 feet out from your house. Don't put them there. And then I wouldn't put them too close to anything. Imagine if you did get something smoldering in there, where it would go. So if you've got, an area of this combustible mulch, you separate it from other areas with non-combustible stuff would be my recommendation. Or, I'm not sure how well they would do composting, et cetera. I don't know too much about that, but most of the time people incorporate them into their landscaping in some way, shape, or form. But, just remember, the farther away from your house you have what's called combustible mulch, the better off, the safer you're going to be. So, and one of the reasons that they won't take them off site is because of the sudden oak death we have out in the county. One of the things that we need to do is not spread sudden oak death. And that's one of the ways we help prevent from, spreading sudden oak death. We don't want to take those chips somewhere else and spread them out. Okay. Good to go.
Yeah, are there any other questions that anybody have?
Hunter, can you talk a little bit, if it's okay, about the expansion of the TPW assessments? Is it the same area? When do they begin? Or any other changes beyond what's occurred in the past? Because my understanding is we're running out of the TPW assessments, but now we got a new extension.
Well, it's the same like funding. We just we weren't finding enough people that were interested in doing the home assessments and the chipper program. So we approached CAL FIRE, see can we expand it to other areas that might be interested that could benefit from the project. And so we proposed these 2 areas because we had seen some interest from residents. And so we expanded the existing project to other project areas. But the actual, dollar amount or anything didn't change for the project.
Okay, great. Well, I just wanted to comment, Hunter, that I'm getting, a tremendous amount of appreciation for this service. And I'd love to be able to visit with you one-on-one and just give you an update, because I've been on the ground with this program and it's been really valuable. So people out there really appreciate it.
Well, good. Yeah, that's great to hear. That's, that's what we want to do. So yeah, I'd love to catch up with you sometime.
Great.
So, yeah.
Okay. All right, Hunter. Thanks for your time and all your work on this, and thanks for the update. So,
Thank you, guys.
Well, all right, we'll dive into the presentation then.
Okay. Have fun. Enjoy.
Thanks, Hunter.
Bye.
Okay. So, the fundamental question that I like to ask is, what's the problem? Particularly when we see what a lot of us think might be a fire front moving through an area, yet we'll see like an entire house that's unscathed and the homes around it are gone, or the reverse. We see a whole area that's very devastated, yet there's an outlier. There's one home standing there, a house standing there all by itself, relatively unscathed. So, why does that happen? So we'll explore that when we dive into the rest of this presentation. But, it kind of leaves you scratching your head. So, we'll try to answer that question as we move forward. But right off the bat, I think part of the problem is looking at our environment. So, if this is your environment, the moon, then, you build something that looks like this. We build it to suit the environment. We're not going to send, a cardboard mailing tube to the moon expecting it to work. We've got to build something that will withstand the environment, whether it's, the radiation or the heat or the cold or whatever. We can't just go land on the moon and, put a cardboard box there and call it a house. So we need to build for the environment. So if this is our environment, then why do we build like this? I tell people sometimes, I think building a house of wood and putting it in the forest is kind of like building a boat out of water and putting it in the ocean, But with that said, we already have homes built of wood in the forest, and we see what can happen to them. So we're going to talk about how those houses get compromised and burned, and we'll explore ways to reduce the risk of that happening to your home. So that there are 3 ways that your homes become engulfed in a fire. It really amounts to what I call the red, R-E-D. You have radiated heat, which occurs when things near the house catch on fire, and that radiated heat heats up your structure, your house, to its ignition point, or heats it up close to its ignition point to make it easier for a direct flame to ignite it. So that's what I call the R, the radiant heat, the R in the red, R-E-D. The second element is embers. And over the last decade, scientists have been studying the fires that we've had, their intensity and frequency, and why things happen the way they do. And one glaring standout is that we're finding that embers are probably the biggest problem, particularly in our Bay Area, with losing homes in a wildland fire. So, and that's the E in the red, RED. Embers are insidious, they're small. Yeah, that they get into tiny spaces, nooks and crannies. And if they can get a foothold onto combustible materials, they can totally wipe out your house once a fire gets going. And then the D in the red is direct flame contact. So there's a RED, radiated heat, embers, and direct flame contact. And most of what we're going to speak to today with regard to structural hardening has to do with helping to make your home withstand that ember attack, because that's really where we need to go. So, oh, there it is. Okay, the radiant heat, embers, and direct flame contact. So those are the three phenomena that will, get your home started in a fire and consume it. If you can prevent your house from being impacted by those three elements, the more you can do to prevent your home from being impacted by those elements, the better off you're going to be. And we're not going to get to perfect. We'll never get to perfect. The idea is to make your house as safe as you can with the resources you have available. And the other concept is to start from the house and work out. I made a note to myself earlier that when I do this series again, with the concept of starting with the house and working out, I'm going to do this webinar first, or this presentation first, and then the 0 to 5 second, and then the defensible space third. Because I think we need to get into the mindset of starting with the house and working out, and working that way. And honestly, for me, I think the biggest bang for the buck is preventing your home from being infiltrated by embers. That's a top priority in my opinion. So this is from IBHS. It's an image from them, and it kind of gives you a pictorial of how those embers fly and can get attached to a structure and involve the structure in fire. And this is a test they did where they have a 20-mile-an-hour wind on this house. It's a full-scale house with a 20-mile-an-hour wind on it, that they push embers into the wind stream to see what different building materials will do. In this particular image, you can see where embers had landed into some combustible material here, kind of like the stuff you'd use to start a campfire, little small stuff. There's a name for it. I don't remember what you call that little fine material used to start a campfire. And then here, if you look at this window, if I'm not mistaken, it looks like some of those embers is stuck in the screen. So they've landed there and kind of got caught in that screen. So when we talk about windows, and screens, that's something to be careful of. Just remember, they're going to land there. So do you have a plastic screen that's non-combustible plastic, or do you have an older style aluminum screen? When you're choosing windows, keep that in mind. Okay. So the other thing that it can do is the embers can ignite combustibles around your home. You can see right here a little bit behind the graphic that it got into some mulch here and here it's going to start to ignite that plant there. So embers, we're going to talk about embers. You're going to get sick of hearing me talk about embers. Once again, should embers land on or near your house, they accumulate like hail. The other thing to be aware of when you walk around your house after it's been real windy, pay attention where all the leaves build up. You'll notice it in inside corners of your house. Oftentimes you'll see a pile of leaves build up there when it's windy. So keep in mind that that's where the embers are going to land as well. So just food for thought as you move forward towards making your home safer. Okay. So if they land on the roof deck or get into vents, you know, they can totally wreak havoc. Here's a wood shake roof. There's a lot of surface on that wood shake roof, lots of opportunities for those embers to grab hold and ignite the wood shakes. And once you start the campfire on fire, you know, those wood shake, then it's going to involve the rest of your house in short order. And even if you're thinking you're going to stay and defend, this thing can grow so fast that you're not going to be able to keep up with it. I will share with you, with some of the fires we're having these days, the intensity of the fires, you know, we all know the scope is easily overwhelming the resources we can throw at them. And, you know, with the intensity and scope of the fires we're having today, firefighters are not putting themselves in front of that fire front. Not going to happen. They're doing what's called fire front following. So they'll hit the flanks of the fires the best they can. They'll rely on aircraft to hit the head of the fire, you know, where the fire is mostly advancing, the front of the fire, oftentimes. And then if their structure is threatened, they'll redirect aircraft to protect structures where they need to. And the boots on the ground are following the flanks. But then after that, they do what's called fire front following, where they have crews go in behind the fire front after it's passed through, and they'll go through and put out hot spots, you know, and put out the fires that are remaining to save whatever homes and you know, built environment is left after that. So that's kind of operationally how that works. So embers, they get in through your windows. They can infiltrate your windows if your windows aren't shut. If you've got gaps around your windows, if you've got gaps in your construction, they'll get in. You know, and when you look at some of these homes, when you see one that's gone to the ground and the ones around it that haven't been touched, oftentimes it's because the embers got in there and the house burned from the inside out. That is oftentimes what happened. Either that or it landed on combustible vegetation next to the fire, and then the direct flame contact and radiant heat involved the exterior, and then it got into it. But oftentimes, you know, if you're looking at something scratching your head, like, why just this one house? It's likely that it was an unlucky house that got infiltrated by those red hot embers and burned from the inside out. And this is an example of something like that. You can see, you know, over here to the right is a home that's relatively unscathed. This is out of near the Fountain Grove area of Santa Rosa. And here's one stucco house, woohoo! You know, many of the trees around this are unscathed. And if you look at that, I look at this and I think, you know, this is probably one of those where, you know, the stucco house, probably a tile roof, an ember probably infiltrated this home and burned it from the inside out. And you can see the heat damage here from the house fire, but here, you know, no heat damage on this vegetation, you know, so, you know, and here too, this is all green here. The fire probably stopped here, you know, the fire front. You know, may have gotten here, may have caught on the fence and got into the home here. Either the fence acted as a fuse, got this thing going, or an ember got inside and burnt it from the inside out. Hard to say, but those are two things we're going to talk about. So we're going to talk about home hardening, making your home more resistant to the wildfire threat. And there are things and you know, for building a new house, there are requirements. You've got, if you live in a wildland urban area, then there are specific building code requirements for what you have to build to be more resistant to wildland fire. However, many of us have homes that are already built, that were built before those regulations went into effect. So we want to do retrofits. And some of those retrofits can be simple, some of them can be complex, some of them can be expensive, some of them can be very cheaply done, if not done for next to nothing. So we'll talk about those, but it does require, you know, as you move forward towards making your home more fire resistant, doing the structural hardening things, you know, we want to make sure you understand how the fire infiltrates your house, and having that understanding moving forward helps you in your decision-making process, I think, in terms of looking at, okay, what do I need to do and how do I prioritize it based on the resources I have, including time, energy, money, all those things. And so I'm going to hand this off to Stuart for a little bit. What Stuart does is he can go out to your house, do an assessment, and do exactly what I mentioned a moment ago. He can walk with you around the home, give you pointers, advice, free advice, because it's a free, if you take advantage of our, you know, grant-funded home assessment project, or part of the TPW project, if you're in the project area, you know, he can, for free, give you free advice. Say, hey, you might think about this, you might think about that. And he's an expert at this. And he'll give you a report when he's done, and that can be your starting point for making your decisions moving forward with what you might do to make your home more fire resistant. So I can talk a lot, so I'm going to hand it off to Stuart. Stuart, you know, if you want to talk a little bit more about, you know, what you do and some of the things you're seeing out there. You've been doing this for, you know, well over a year now. You know, I want to get a sense for what you're seeing and what you can share with folks. Don't forget to unmute.
Sorry about that. Yeah, thanks, Roberta. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to all of you. I'm certified in wildfire mitigation, and I've been working with Fire Safe Sonoma, looking at a lot of homes throughout the entire Sonoma County area. So there's other grants that we've been provided that are unfortunately starting to run out in other parts of the county. But I just wanted to mention that the principles that I'll be talking about are relevant to all kinds of different environments, whether it's a suburb like Oakmont, or, you know, a suburb of Petaluma or Cloverdale, Cazadero, you know, Bodega. It really runs the gamut. I've been all over the county looking at all different types of properties and talking to all different types of people with all different types of backgrounds. So it's a great opportunity to provide hands-on education and support for homeowners. And I also do it privately. So I can talk to folks that are not in the grant program. And should I give my website, Roberta?
Yeah, Kaylin can probably put it in the
Okay.
chat stream. Yeah,
Great.
absolutely. But go ahead and toss it out there.
Yeah, so I'm doing that privately as well. And I'm also subcontracting with a company called All Risk Shield. And they do similar work in terms of assessments, but they also do more extensive applications of different services, like applying liquid Fastcheck. Fastcheck is a retardant that's dropped from aircraft, but there's a clear version that can be sprayed on vegetation. So I'm gonna just close my shade here real quick, sorry.
Okay.
I don't know how that is, that's probably better. Anyway, so what I do is I make an appointment with the homeowner, and I come out, and with the homeowner, I walk around the property, and I'm looking at details, as Roberta said, emphasizing structural hardening. Hardening is, you know, making the structure more defensible against embers and, of course, radiant heat. So I spend time looking around at minor details. Someone might have lived there a month, which was the case yesterday when I went to a house in Glen Ellen. And other times people have been there 30, 40, 50 years, and I'm seeing things that they may not have seen themselves. And so, as Roberta mentioned, embers is the primary cause of the destruction and damage to these homes. About 90% of the homes that are damaged and destroyed during these events are impacted by embers. And what we find in the research and the after incident reports is an ember snuck into a little nook and cranny underneath a deck or inside a vent, and can burn down a home quickly, or perhaps a day or two later. Everybody's gone, nobody's there, nobody did anything, but an ember was festering. So I walk around with a laser pointer, very strong laser pointer, pointing at different objects, trees hundreds of feet away, looking at defensible space and bushes and things like that. Real quickly, I define defensible space as the placement and maintenance of vegetation. So a lot of times it is good to have an assessment done before you have landscape work done, or before you have tree work done, or before you do any hardening or retrofitting, because what I find is after I get there, they say, oh, I just had this tree removed. And I said, oh, you know, tell me where the tree is. Well, it turns out they didn't really need to spend the money removing that tree. What they should have done is limbed it up, remove the ladder fuels, cut out the dead wood. So a lot of times you can save a lot of money by having someone come and look at your property and give you the priorities. So when it comes to the embers, I'm looking at vents, foundation vents, looking whether or not the screen is a fine enough gauge to prevent embers from entering. So most vents that are with older homes, their vents are 1/4 inch mesh gap in the gauge, and we're recommending 1/8 inch venting. You might want to retrofit with a new vent, or you could potentially install screen to that vent yourself in a DIY kind of fashion. So looking at all the dormer vents, the eave vents, the foundation vents, looking at nooks and crannies, looking at cracks in the house, looking at gaps underneath where the siding goes down to the ground. And do people have wood chips against wood siding? Yes, they do. It's really not a good place to have wood chips, obviously, as Roberta mentioned earlier. And so that gap underneath the siding, there's an ember that can enter right underneath that siding and potentially ignite the house on fire after a period of time. So there are opportunities to fill gaps with caulk, whether it's in the siding, in the eaves, or other places. And those minor details can really make a big difference. Of course, it's interesting coming up to someone's property that every house is different, even if they're all identical on a suburban street. Everybody has different vegetation. People maintain their house differently. And real quickly, on a global scale, I would define the problem in 4 parts of the stool, not necessarily in this order, but the 4 parts I would consider climate change, forest management, the age and condition of a structure, and then the 4th one would be the location of the structure and the resources that are available to it in terms of water suppression, manpower, people power, that kind of thing. So a lot of times I'm finding different people, regardless of their background, whether they're a lawyer or firefighter or police officer or whoever. It's interesting to see the different emphasis that they put on their property. Some people say, I really want to remove this bay tree. I really want to get rid of that bay tree. Well, the question is, where is the bay tree? Is it a problem or is it not a problem? Do you really want to spend the time doing that? And so I go back to the structure. So that brings us back to what Roberta was saying, is I call it ground zero in the 0 to 5 foot zone. 0 is the structure. And what we're finding is you can have amazing defensible space. You can have cement, rock, dirt, whatever, but embers fly over defensible space, and they laugh at defensible space. They really could care less. So defensible space is super important for many reasons: to get rid of those ladder fuels, to get rid of the grasses that are dead, to limb things up, remove dead material, where the tree or plant or bush is located, what type it is, etc. However, embers just go right over that and they attack the structure. So Roberta asked me to mention some of the things that I'm seeing out in the field. Some of the things I'm seeing are pretty simple and basic, but they're forgotten. So they want to talk about a tree getting removed, hear the big bang in the forest, but I said, well, the first thing you got to do is clean your roof. The roof has got tons of debris on it. It's got pine needles. It's got moss. Moss is very flammable. People forget about the moss. A lot of times it destroys the roof, degrades the roof. The condition of your house is a big factor in making your house more defensible against fire. So the more current your paint is, the cleaner your roof is, the better condition your roof is. All these things really matter in terms of wildfire mitigation. Gutters are a big issue. So I'm constantly seeing gutters that are filled with material. They may have gutter screens, but the gutter screens are popping off. They're in 3-foot segments. They're cheap. They flip over. They have debris in them. Or people are climbing on the roof and cleaning the roof, which is dangerous for any age group and wears out the roof. So I do generally recommend having gutter covers on the gutters to prevent material from landing in there. And I'll just mention, when firefighters have time, which often they don't, when there's a big event coming, they'll prep houses in advance, and they'll go to a house and they'll start pulling material away from the sides of the house, cushions, doormats, umbrellas. They'll collapse umbrellas. They might even tear down your gutter. Well, why would they do that? Well, sometimes gutters are made out of vinyl, and vinyl gutters are very vulnerable. So if there's debris in there, they literally may go ahead and pull down your gutter on purpose. So, because if you have a bunch of debris in there and that gutter drops down, you have a long fuse right in front of your house that can ignite any vegetation and add a lot of fuel. So gutters are super important to keep clean. What else we got here?
Yeah, just be aware that we're going to run out of time, and a lot of this I will cover. So.
Yeah. Well, okay. So I guess maybe the other thing in the wildland areas like West County, gates are really important. Does your gate have a backup battery? How can you open the gate? How can a first responder open your gate if there's no power? Do you have a pin system that they can get to and pull the pin to warn you, to help you evacuate? Communications, really important. Before the glass fire, I had the opportunity to get a pulse point notification, which I wouldn't have gotten unless I had pulse point. It's a free app that gives you an alert as to an event in your area like a wildfire. I was able to look up that address. It was a client of mine, and I called her and told her to evacuate right away from St. Helena Road off of Calistoga Road. She and her husband packed up and left immediately. There was a fire less than a half a mile away from their home. So communications is very important. Evacuation routes, I talk about evacuation, not only from the area, the roads, knowing the backup routes, plan A, plan B, plan C, but also how do you get off your property? So a lot of these properties I look at in the West County, they might be half acre, they might be 20 acres, they might be 50 acres. Sometimes there's an access route where if they have permission to cut a fence in advance with bolt cutters and then wire it back up until an event happens, they might be able to drive through that fence and exit off their property. So that's an observation that I share with people as well, as a way for them to increase their survivability. I also send relevant links on videos on this subject. Jack Cohen is a famous, well-known fire scientist, researcher. So I'll send links on videos. I'll send links on flame retardant paint and stain. Sometimes a person will have a fence coming right up to their house, which is really a bad source of fuel. They really don't want to get rid of the fence for privacy or other issues. And I say, well, I recommend you getting rid of that 5-foot section of wooden fuse connected to your home and right underneath your eave. However, a secondary option would be to add some, coat that structure with flame retardant stain. It's not foolproof, but would give an extra measure of protection.
A lot of this stuff we will cover later in the presentation.
Well, I didn't know that. So anyway, there you go.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So these are things that are always on my mind, and I apologize, Roberta, for that.
Oh, that's okay. No, we're good.
If there's any redundancy. So I guess I'll hand it over to you, Roberta, if you have any questions or if you want me to follow up anything.
Yeah, no, and it's feel free to chime in if you see anything, in the presentation moving forward that, you want to comment on or share experiences with. But yeah, we've got about, less than 10 minutes to get to the Q&A. Just so you guys know, the attendees, we'll probably go a little past 3 o'clock before we start the Q&A. And it looks like a small enough group that we will probably be able to manage the Q&A and get finished on time. If we do run a little over, I have a little gift for anybody that hangs out past the 3:30 mark. So there is that. Okay, so thanks, Stuart. I'm gonna go back to the presentation and we'll get this party started again. Okay, just want to confirm, Kaylin, you see the PowerPoint okay? Just to confirm?
Yep.
Okay,
Yes.
cool. All right, so let's dive into a lot of what Stuart was talking about here. So homes survive with a combination of, a lot of the stuff Stuart was getting into, management of combustible materials near the structure. And we talked about these things in our first two presentations we did. And then also the careful landscape selection, placement, and maintenance. So just to kind of do a real fast review of our earlier presentations, it doesn't have to be a moonscape. And if you want a good sense for, what to do with the plants in that space, take a look at our second presentation. And Ellie Inslee, she's a landscape architect. She talks a lot about, how best to place your plants and what plants to choose and all that kind of stuff. And then also, oops, my thing's too slow. And then the third thing is what we're talking about today, the incorporation of fire and ember resistant construction materials and their installation details and maintenance of those features. So, so in this presentation, we're going to show you how to harden your home by reducing its vulnerability. As I mentioned before, you're going to reduce the risk. You won't eliminate it entirely, I don't believe. But the idea is to reduce the risk as best you can with the resources you have available to you. And it's more than just having a stucco house and a tile roof. There are actually more important things you can do, with your home that you have today. If you don't have a stucco house or a tile roof, there's still things you can do. It relies on the awareness of seemingly small details like vents, and cracks in openings and things like that, and maintenance, routine maintenance. And this is what Stuart does. He does these home assessments and he'll walk you around the house and generate a report and get you going on your tasks to point you in the right direction. So, but like Stuart mentioned, every house is unique, like you said, and you can look at several homes that or in a urbanized area or a suburb, and each one has its own little set of characteristics. So, you gotta look at yours personally. And, keep in mind you've got your neighbors too, if they're influencing you, or influencing your risk. This is a slide that shows kind of the generic prioritization for the tasks to make your home more fire safe relative to structural hardening. This is kind of like the universal industry standard. And it's based on studies done by University of California Cooperative Extension, which is what a lot of this presentation is built off of. But recent studies have shown that depending on where you live in California, your geography, those priorities actually vary a little bit. Statewide, here's how they shape up. In the Bay Area, a little different than the northern interior or Southern California. So if you look at these three broad regions of the geography of California, you can see that here in the Bay Area, the Northern California area, these are the things that we've learned impact us the most with our structural hardening. And so, right off the bat, the age of the structure here is really non-existent, because I think it has a lot to do with in the Bay Area. Our houses are new enough to where that's not an issue, or they're new enough to where we don't have, combustible roofs, or there's local regulations in place, or have been for a long time, at least restricting combustible roofs. A lot of the Bay Area, we've had the requirement for a Class A roof as a local requirement for a very long time. And then contrary to that, or contrasting that, is the eaves. That's this color here. The eaves are a huge problem in the Bay Area, we've discovered, in terms of, your risk to wildland fire. Those darn little embers, you tried soaking them out, you tried scrubbing them out, you still get those darn embers. Okay, but anyway, so we're gonna take a look real quick at prioritization based on the Bay Area demographic. And so with that said, and you don't have to as an individual, you can reprioritize these yourself, depending on, like I said earlier, your resources available, the money you have, the time you have, etc. But I just want to share with you, in order to get the most bang for your buck, or reduce the risk as much as you can with specific tasks or projects, this is how they shape up. Number one is eaves. In the study that I pulled this out of, it didn't go into a lot of detail about eave vents, but I am imagining that within the scope of the study, when they talk about eaves, they're also talking about eave vents. So when we talk about vents down here, vent screen, we're mostly talking about your foundation venting. So up here, when we're talking about eaves, that's your roof edge, your gutter, your soffit vents, those kinds of things. So I just wanted to clarify that right off the bat. So this is what they look like for us. The eaves, number one issue, windows second, third siding, fourth is your porches and decks, and 5 is your roof, and then 6 is your foundation vents. Okay, so starting off with eaves, we're going to take each of those priorities in order as I just described them based on the Bay Area demographic. And the first one is eaves. So let's look at eaves. What do? They protect your house from rain, and it gives you a little bit of shade on your windows, things like that. If you've got an extended roof over a deck, it just protects the areas underneath it. But there are problems with eaves. Depending on the design, your eaves can also trap heat and allow embers to enter through under eave attic vents. So if you've got like this, a gable end vent, when wind moves across an area, if you imagine the wind hitting the broad side of this structure, the force of the wind is increased because it's running into that resistance. It's kind of like putting up your hand in the middle of a water stream coming out of a hose. You can feel it, and all that water is hitting there with concentrated force, as opposed to just cruising over the top of it. So the wind dynamic here is such that the force behind the wind here is going to help to push embers into this vent. And if you don't have, the right material in this vent, if that's simply 1/4 inch mesh, the chance of your embers getting into your attic is right there. It's a very good chance that will occur. Around your eaves, you have blocking. So when you look at your own home, look for cracks. Here's an example of a crack where an ember can climb into it. If you've got this style of eave vents, they're called pigeonhole or bird hole eave vents. Behind here is usually a 1/4 inch mesh. If that's what you have, at least cover this up with 1/8 inch mesh. If even better yet, put a newer style fire resistant, specially designed vent in there. Well, I'll show you that in a second here. So here's a similar image where we've kind of got around to closing up that gap there, with some trim and some caulking. You could do a lot with a couple of tubes of caulking, to reduce those nooks and crannies. But here it's a different part of the same building, but here we're showing you, to contrast the other image, show you how that gap underneath that blocking is closed up. And then here are pieces of a specific vent. I'm going to show you the vent that's meant to go there real quick. So what's meant to go there is one of these, okay? And it's a little soffit vent you can purchase. I think this is a Vulcan product. And behind it, you know, which is common to similar vents of this type, there's some honeycomb material that's coated with an intermittent material. So that when this gets hot, this intermittent material expands and closes this off completely so that embers and heat can't get through it. And it's meant to go in the holes under this soffit vent. This is an experiment I tried. I purchased some of these for my house and I couldn't quite get these to fit those pigeonholes. So I just took the material out for now and put in the holes for now. But what I need to do is go around the house and, you know, increase the size of those holes. I have to ream them out, increase the size of those holes so that these vents will fit. Once I do that, then I can, you know, go through and finish that project. So that's what's going on there. That's a product. The product itself is a little pricey, but over time, you know, if one of the things I promised myself I would do at the beginning of this year is budget $100 a month to go towards fixing this problem in my house. So I'm going to spend $100 a month and start off by buying these because this is a top priority. Buy a bunch of these and little by little, you know, start circling the whole attic, the whole eave of my house and covering these holes with these special vents. But it can be done. But like I said earlier, in the absence of putting that on there, at least, you know, go purchase a roll of 1/8" mesh. You know, get like a 3-inch roll of 1/8" mesh, and you can just roll it right over here and staple it on with a staple gun. If you're concerned about the look, you could probably get a 1/8" vent, you know, something like this, that actually has 1/8" vent. This is 1/4 inch. So you want to get the kind with 1/8" vent, 1/8" mesh, and you could probably just take that and put it over there and it'll look like your underfloor up above. It won't be so architecturally displeasing. When I was a fire marshal for the county, somebody was complaining once about having to put this big red alarm bell on the outside of the building. The architect was like, oh, do we have to put that? Can we paint the red fire alarm bell a different color so it matches the house? And I'm like, why? It's like, because that red bell is ugly. And I'm like, look, there's nothing ugly about fire safety. It's beautiful. It's like jewelry, you know, highlight it, you know. So, you know, yeah, there's nothing ugly about fire safety in my opinion.
Hey, Roberta, sorry to rush you along. It's 3:05, and also I think your fire scanner is on in the background.
It is. We'll just deal with that if you
Okay.
don't mind. Yeah, I meant to turn it off. It's not too busy now. Thanks for sharing that with me. I'll have to make a note to turn it off next time. But yeah, and I'm going to try to move along a little quickly, you guys. So there we go. So if you can box in your vent, it's even better because you reduce the surface area for heat to radiant heat to heat up those smaller dimension materials. Even better, less surface area for an ember to land. Here you've got some really tight, you know, vents where it's going to be really difficult for an ember to get up in there. And also in this case, gravity is working 100% against the embers trying to jump up inside there. And then if you've got something like this, like Stuart mentioned earlier, your defensible space folds into play here. You know, trim this stuff away from your gutters, away from your house if this is your situation. So then next on the priority list is windows. So with windows, I will share this image with you. In the interest of time, I'm going to go through this really quick. This is from the campfire, I believe. It's an image by corals. I don't have this annotation there. I meant to do that. But anyway, it looks to me like an ember probably landed in this combustible mulch and got this combustible mulch going, and it consumed a bush here that probably looked like this bush, and then it consumed a smaller bush, maybe here, maybe comparable size completely. You see the smoke damage here. You see out here the heat damage on the lawn, different color. From the heat, it's drier than the rest of it out here. And then it got into this bush. And I think what happened here, when this bush was involved, somebody came along, either a passerby, a good Samaritan or somebody, and extinguished this before it consumed to the point of looking like this or looking like this. I think they probably put this out and this out before it burned completely. And I can tell, I think, because this is greener here, not as much radiant heat from it being completely consumed. But the big takeaway here with regard to windows is that with this bush, it actually cracked that window. So this window here has got a crack in it behind it that you don't see. So, you know, that's the thing to be aware of with windows. If you're replacing windows, get the WUI windows, especially if you're in a WUI zone. You're going to be probably required to, depending on whether, you know, if you do a remodel, may or may not be required. But if you do a remodel and you're replacing windows, upgrade it. You know, get and a WUI window is one that has a, you know, one of the, you're going to be required to get dual pane regardless. So when you buy your dual pane window, the difference between a WUI window, wildland urban interface area window, and a typical thermal window is one of the panes in the WUI window is tempered glass. And I don't think that's particular about which pane it is. If it were me, I would probably, if it were me and I still had kids in the house, I'd put the tempered pane on the inside. But if I have a lot of kids in the neighborhood, I'd put the tempered window pane on the outside, hopefully for obvious reasons. And then the more windows you have, the more vulnerable you are to window issues, whether it's embers landing on your screen, which may or may not be a combustible screen material we talked about earlier. Make sure you close the windows if you have to evacuate. If you have to evacuate, you know, make sure you take precautions there. I think I'll talk about that in a minute. So upgrade your windows, dual pane windows, tempered glass is best. Mentioned that already. And then, yeah, so here's the slide, you know, when you are in either a red flag condition or you've got the evacuation warning, not the order yet, start doing things. Close your windows, pull combustibles, you know, draperies and curtains away. If you have combustible blinds, pop them open, move anything that can be impacted from radiant heat away from that area. And, you know, in my case, this is my house, I've got metal blinds. This is actually before I got metal blinds, but I have metal blinds here now. So in this case, I would probably close my metal blinds and completely and then pull the combustible curtains out of the way. Okay. Why are we not switching here? Okay. On the outside of your window, like that image graphically showed us earlier, keep the plants away from the windows. If you've got, you remember the 0 to 5 area, you know, if you have any combustibles in that 0 to 5, get them out of there. You know, but definitely don't put something like this in a jungle of junipers in front of your windows. If this is you, Stuart's going to say, hey, you're going to want to trim back this material away from your windows and get it out of the 5-foot area at the minimum.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then another option is to install shutters, or even, you know, if you've got a next door neighbor who, you know, has an eyesore, a combustible nightmare, a hazard right next to you, and they're obviously not going to do much about it, you may want to go to the extent of, you know, getting some drywall and screw it over your windows before you leave. To keep the heat and fire out. But in this case, this is a woman who lives in Oakmont, and she actually went to the extent of putting these louvered closers on her home. And she says that she'll close these in the winter and summertime when it's appropriate, and it saves on her energy bill too. But you know, you could put storm shutters here. Like I said, go get some sheetrock, you know, and put over there before you leave if you have to. Those are all options. And then I do want to also wrap up the openings / windows priority and remind folks about openings under your doors. If they're not weather stripped well, particularly garage doors. Oftentimes our garage doors, for whatever reason, have a gap or a partial gap here. If you do, get a hold of your garage door person and have them make sure that you've got the weather stripping there that's required. And it's also part of the safety system. There should be a pretty significant weather strip there / safety bumper. So if the garage door comes down, if it bumps, it'll open back up if it's an automatic door, assuming that. But regardless, if you have a condition where you've got a gap there, at least before you leave, get some non-combustible pavers, pull them out of the walkway, stick them in front of any gaps you have there and close that up before you leave. But be thinking about all the openings around the structure where those nasty embers can infiltrate. Okay, so siding, we're already a quarter after. Siding, so siding's important. Priority number 3, it's vulnerable to radiant heat and direct flame contact. Not so vulnerable to embers unless you've got a bunch of nooks and crannies, which oftentimes can be remedied with some caulking. If you've got a fence right next to your structure, like Stuart mentioned, if it's a combustible fence, it can act as a fuse to where if the plants next to your fence gets the fence on fire, or if your fence catches on fire by itself, it can burn until it connects to your house. And right there, you've got the fuse lighting your house on fire. Oftentimes though, the good news is the gates are oftentimes right next to your house. So oftentimes what you can do is swap out your gate with a non-combustible gate, either chain link or corrugated metal or custom made gate, so that when a fire gets on your fence and gets to the gate will act as an insulator and keep the fire from igniting your house. Out of last resort, if you've got a wooden fence, open the gate before you leave and block it open with something powerful that the wind's not going to push away, and shut the gate after you've already left it open. You want to, that's another option to reduce the chance of your fence catching your house on fire. Okay, and that's a no cost item. Just get a heavy paver and stick it on your gate to hold it open. As we've mentioned many times, gaps in siding could be a good landing spot for an ember. You get an ember, lands right here in this little crack, get a little wind on it, and this siding's gonna get going in short order. And then here as well, lots of opportunities here for those little embers to grab hold of. If you imagine a 20-mile-an-hour wind pushing embers against the side of this, it's pretty predictable what's going to happen. So in this case, if this is you, one option is to, paint over this with your heavy-duty house paint. Next step up, paint over it with some, fire-resistant intermittent paint product. And then probably the third item in terms of cost, expense, would be to replace the siding altogether. But those are options. And then, just because you have stucco or something like that, doesn't mean that, you're impervious. Just keep in mind those embers. They can get anywhere. And here's a situation where I wanted to point out here where this older building, this siding is actually pretty robust. It's like a tongue and groove siding that is going to resist embers, but some of the rest of this is a little scary. It looks a little ugly, probably not as risky as it looks, but there are other parts of this that are a little risky. So you want to, I just want to point out here is where you have siding, where the siding materials lock together really tightly, it's going to resist infiltration of embers more than other types of siding. And then as Stuart mentioned earlier, where the siding is close to the ground is actually a building code requirement that you have at least 6 inches here. So Stuart, did you have a question or are you? Okay.
No.
I saw your hand go back and forth. So if you have, this condition, make sure that you don't have any combustible mulch or leaves or things like that, where if they ignite, they can ignite the bottom of your siding, like Stuart mentioned. So, you want to have at least 6 inches there. The building code requires it. For rot, anything closer than 6 inches, you're likely to get moisture up in there, and the moisture will wick up into the wood and eventually rot your siding. But for fire safety purposes, get that combustible mulch actually 5 feet away. But if you do have it against there, make sure it's at least 5 inches off the bottom edge of your siding. And then, like I mentioned earlier, one of the most cost-effective and some, in I think fun home improvement projects is to go around your house and do some caulking. And one of the things that you could do if you're worried about having all this caulking striping all over your house is you could find something that you might be able to remove from your house that's the same color, maybe a piece of trim or something, and take it to a paint supply place, and they could actually match the color of your paint. I've done that before. I had solar panels installed in my house, and I wanted them to paint the conduit to match the siding. And so while they were installing the solar panels, I took a piece of material I had from the house that was the same color to the paint place, and I gave it to the gal, and I go, hey, would you mind matching this paint? I just need a quart. And so she matched it. I took it back. I gave it to the solar guys. I go, hey, before you guys leave, you want to make sure you paint all the conduit so it matches. So that's something you could do after you caulk and the caulk dries. You can go behind it and use color matched paint to paint over it. Makes it fun. Turn it into fun. Oh, this slide's actually out of place. So here's an example of a non-combustible fence right up against a structure, and this is, imagine, pretty pricey and very elegant, but like I mentioned earlier, at a minimum, open the gate. Gel coatings, they're not recommended because they're difficult to install and have limited shelf life. However, Stuart might be able to speak to this. I am aware that some insurance companies have the option of opting into a service where a protective coating company will go out to the insured house and coat it if you have a fire front headed your way. And if you opt in for that, I think it reduces your premium, from what I understand. Do you know any more about that, Stuart? With the maybe it's the Fastcheck or something?
Well, I know a little bit about it, but I think we're running low on time. But the Fastcheck that I was talking about is sprayed on the vegetation, as you know. It's a different item, but yeah. Okay.
All right. Thanks. And then number 4 is decks. Decks are pretty, hopefully, obvious. If you've got a combustible deck, which many of us have, and it's existing, the biggest thing there is just get the combustibles off the deck if you've got a fire approaching, if you've got a red flag, or if you've got a evacuation warning. Bring those combustible cushions and combustible lawn furniture and stuff like that indoors, or put them in your garage, because we all know your car's not in the garage by then. It's out on the driveway back there.
Also, real quick, Roberta, I find that decks, especially in the West County area, is a major problem and a major vulnerability. I would rank it up higher than some of the other areas, actually, because people do store things underneath their decks, but there are also big gaps for embers. So.
Yeah, and so thank you for that, Stuart, because that's a macro view of our specific geography. Sonoma County is where Stuart's working. And yeah, that's even more of a detail. So yeah, so take that in mind, folks. Maybe move this number 4 priority up a little bit in the prioritization.
What people are doing is they're screening vertically from the edge of the deck down to the ground. Some decks are 4 feet off the ground, some are much higher, where that gets more challenging, but there are some ways to mitigate the open spaces under decks, which are really vulnerable.
Oh, perfect. Yeah. Yeah. So what'll happen with decks is, you'll get combustible material that'll build up in the cracks here. And then, you got to maintain it, keep that stuff out there, especially if you're in a red flag. That wind's going to be blowing stuff on your deck. Keep brushing it off, blowing it off with your leaf blower so that you're not leaving your house with a bunch of junk on there before you go. More stuff will blow in behind you, but the less material that's there before you have to evacuate, the better. And then, once again, move the furniture inside. If you got pets, move them inside, or better yet, take them with you when you have to leave. But move that stuff inside. If you've got, a condition where you might have a stucco siding and combustible deck, be aware of that. Depending on the condition of the deck, if it's in real poor condition, and you've got wood siding here, you can get the siding ignited once you get the deck going. So be aware of that. If you have a gap here like this, you may want to put some caulking in there or trim that out so that you don't have that deck there, where an ember can take hold. Once again, you want to clean the decks, this kind of stuff, get that out of there best you can before you leave or evacuate. And then don't do this, like Stuart was talking about. If you must have combustibles under here, this is 0 to 5 here. This shouldn't even be here. But Stuart was talking about on the outside structure, putting some 1/8" mesh over all this, make it kind of like a chicken coop almost. But cover and close all this in so that those embers won't get in there and get this stuff going. That's really bad.
I have a really good picture I can send you, Roberta, of that. It's probably like 1/32 mesh that people are putting vertically, down the side of their decks.
Perfect. Yeah, totally. It's like doing a giant bird proofing task. And then once again, bring everything inside. If you've got a propane barbecue, disconnect the tank, move it away. I threw that away a couple weeks ago. But yeah, get that away from there. And then if you're doing a deck remodel or building a new deck for $20 a roll thereabouts, you can get this aluminum metal tape. And if you put that on top of your joist, if you're using, fire resistant deck material, and put this tape on top of your joist before you put your deck material down there, an ember can land there all day long, but it's not going to ignite your joist on fire. So that's an extra precaution you could do. And you want it to fold it over, push it on really tight so it doesn't come off in a year. And then the roof, if you don't have a Class A roof, then that's going to be a very expensive undertaking. And if you replace your roof and you're in a wildland urban interface zone, you're going to be required to replace it with a Class A roof. And a Class A roof really is a roof that's not like this, not a wood shake roof. But a Class A roof is one that's non-combustible. I'll show you an image of that in a moment. And then as Stuart mentioned earlier, where you have a complex architecture, where you have all these inside corners, these are spots where leaves and stuff can build up. If this is the kind of roof you have, you probably have to do more maintenance on your roof than the average person. Get up there with your leaf blower or broom and get that stuff out of there. Here, this one actually has storm shutters, which is a good thing. So you go up there, close the shutters, and then blow all this stuff out before you take off. So Class A roof, when we talk about Class A roof, we're talking about the entire assembly. And that's the plywood underneath and everything else. And we are running out of time. So non-combustible roofs include your common composition shingle, tile, and metal. You'll see sometimes where people will go over an older roof with a lightweight metal roof that looks like tile, but actually is a lightweight metal that they put on top of wood cleats that I wouldn't recommend doing in an area that's susceptible to wildland fire. Any exposed edges, you want to make sure that they have flashing. So if the edge of the plywood, is there, you want to make sure that it's flash so that if an ember lands here, there's nothing for it to ignite. And it almost goes unsaid at this point. Keep your darn drain, your rain gutters clear. And in some areas, you're required to have, gutter guards. So be looking forward to that down the road if you don't already have those. There's an example of a really good gutter guard product. I don't remember the name of it, but this is robust. It's a really good, expensive, but a very good gutter product. And then your foundation vents, really the thing to be aware of, there's an attic vent. We talked about attic vents earlier. With attic vents, I do want to reinforce, so if you have attic vents, don't install or don't store combustibles up in your attic where you have those attic vents where embers can get in. Even if you put, you know, smaller mesh on those attic vents, some embers can still get through there. So try not to have combustibles stacked up in your attic, you know, anywhere near where an ember can get in there. Same thing with your underfloor area. You know, if you've got combustibles underneath your house, get them away from you. You know, here's our foundation vents here. Get those away from there. And then, of course, if you have to leave and you haven't retrofitted your foundation vents with the 1/8 inch or other fire safe vent already, one of the things you can do is you can, you know, put some pieces of plywood over there and tack them over there before you leave. Or you can even take some of that metal tape I showed you earlier, tape it over before you leave. Temporarily, these are temporary things because your attic and your underfloor area needs to be able to breathe. So once the fire threat is no longer there, you want to open those back up. But, you know, a non-expensive home improvement solution is to get a roll of 1/8 inch mesh, and you could pop these off, put the 1/8 inch behind there, pop them back on, or you can replace them with 1/8 inch mesh vents entirely, or even better, you know, replace them with one of these vents that have the honeycomb mesh in there that'll completely seal up the vent in case of fire. So in review, right at 3:30, these are the priorities. So let's open it up for Q&A real quick. And I apologize that we ran a little bit late. That's my bad for fully stewarding as a guest speaker and not predicting that we would use more time. So let's turn on speaker view and let's have the Q&A, Kaylin, as much as we can get through. And I hope folks can still stay. We're going to go longer. And like I said, I have a gift for you guys a little bit later when we're done.
And if you have to hop off, please feel free to email me at firesafesonomastaff@gmail.com your question, and we'll get it sorted. So I'll just hop right in. There's a couple questions about roofs. So someone's asking, any comments on how to best protect roof ridge vents from embers? And then another person had a question about if you still need to, the metal roof, if you still have to worry about moss with metal roofs.
With metal roofs, you still have to worry about any kind of combustibles that end up there. You know, whether it's moss or pine needles or whatever, you still want to keep it clear. You know, and you know, you can use your imagination in terms of the threat. If you've got a pile of pine needles on there and an ember gets in there, there is a chance that the heat from the fire generated there could conduct all the way through the metal. You know, and some roofs have thicker gauge metal than others. But then remember, most of the time you've got plywood underneath there. So, you know, if you get enough of a fire there, they can get that plywood underneath ignited. Then you've got an attic fire underneath. But, you know, if the moss is moist and green, then probably not an issue. But like Stuart mentioned, you know, you get into the drought times in, you know, drier months, that stuff will dry out and it will become a combustible material.
Yeah, real quick on the metal roofs, I do get questions, should I put a metal roof on my house? And I generally say no, because it's 2 or 3 or sometimes even more times as expensive. The shingle roof, asphalt shingle roof, you might call it, is a Class A roof, as well as the metal roof is the Class A roof. So a metal roof is much more expensive. It's also easily damaged if you ever need to walk on it. And, you know, it's not going to probably grow as much moss, but moss still could accumulate. So the metal roof thing is an aesthetic thing. It's really attractive. And certainly if you can afford it, you know, go ahead, I guess, but I would usually prioritize spending that money on other things.
Yeah, good. Yeah, if it were me and I was looking at funding, I would fund my events first thing. That's the first thing I would do, is fund my events. As I mentioned earlier, I'm doing. The other part of that question, I think, was a ridge vent. Climb up in your attic and take a look at those ridge vents and see what the mesh is of that screen. Oftentimes it's already going to be 1/8 inch, sometimes even smaller gauge, but take a look at that. If it's not 1/8 inch or smaller, then you may want to consider, you know, going up there with a roll of the 1/8 inch meshing or smaller and cutting pieces in there and covering that up with a smaller mesh. But go up there in the attic on a nice cool morning and take a look and see what you have to work with. But if you've got a ridge vent and it's 1/4 inch, that's going to be a problem.
Okay, someone's asking, I've seen recommendations for 1/16 inch vent mesh covers. Have you seen that for sale anywhere around here? And where do you recommend getting the 1/8 inch option for a DIY install?
The 1/8 inch, you can buy it in, you know, chunks or rolls from most of your hardware stores. I'm not going to endorse any company. But yeah, you can purchase it, you know, a pair of tin snippers, you can cut it to fit. It's not too difficult to work with. I think the smaller the mesh, the better in terms of, you know, keeping the embers out. But I do want to add a cautionary note there that, you know, the area of your venting is prescribed by the cubic feet of the space. So in this presentation, those blueprint images are the house that I designed, that I'm in now, that I live, well, this is our office, but the house I have is, you know, a house that I drew the plans for. And when I was drawing the plans, I don't remember the ratio, but the area of underfloor and attic vent I had to have was predicated on the cubic volume in that space. So if you have X number volume, then you have to have X number square feet or square inches of attic venting or underfloor venting. So with that said, when you go to a smaller mesh, you've, at least to some degree, have reduced the area of that you have for the airflow. So just keep that in mind, you know, that if it looks like you've got a lot of vents, probably not going to be a problem going to the smaller gauge. But if it looks like for the volume you've got just a couple of vents, then, you know, you may want to be careful about that, or cut some more holes, you know, do them strategically, add some more vents and then go to the smaller gauge.
Okay, Jenny asked in the chat, what was the UCCE reference shown at the end? I think it was your last slide, Roberta. You had it up really briefly. Can you go back to it again?
Let me just go back to screen share real quick and show you guys that. Whenever I do a presentation, I like to reference the information that I used to make the presentation, you know, because I don't make this stuff up, you guys. You know, it's not intuitive. So the material for this presentation came from these two sources: the University of California Co-op Extension for the bulk of it, and then this recent article that was done, a study done based on the fires we've seen in California between 2013 and 18. That's where the prioritization charts came from this information specific to the Bay Area. So.
Okay. Someone was asking, do you recommend removing window screens during a red flag or evacuation warning?
Yes, if you're able to take that on as part, especially if you've got, you know, plastic screens. And if you can't tell if you have plastic screens that are fire resistant or not, if you don't know, I would certainly recommend you remove them before you go. You saw the image where the embers stuck in there. You know, I wouldn't make it a top priority. It's kind of like, wow, if you've got the extra time and energy and can do it quickly and easily, and then put them back on quickly and easy, I'd say do it. I personally do not have plastic screens. I don't remember when we ordered our window package when we built the house, if we got screens that are non-combustible or not. But I don't remove mine. I just take that risk on as a burden. But certainly couldn't hurt to pop those off before you go.
Okay, and there's 2 more questions in the Q&A that are kind of follow-up questions. Brad was asking, is a membrane roof class A?
I'm not sure what you mean by membrane roof, if you're talking about like the material they use oftentimes in commercial structures where they actually have, or manufactured homes, mobile homes too. They'll just roll this stuff on there. And if they're doing that in a wild and urban interface area, or if they're doing that in an area that requires a Class A roof, or oftentimes on certain types of commercial buildings like jails, hospitals, schools, where we would call it a type 1 building, then that's required to be a type Class A material. But if you're doing a membrane roof, just make sure whatever material you're using for that membrane is, you know, rated for as a Class A component. You know, you get the Class A rating as a complete assembly. So with the roofing material, the composite of materials gets your overall rating. So, you know, you don't want to put, you know, you know, composition type A roof product on top of graham cracker crust, because that's not going to work. That's not the correct assembly.
Okay, and then one last question here. Jenny was clarifying her question. She meant the ridge. She had the question about the like middle ridge on the roof, but she was meaning the ridge that goes along the length of the roof to allow air to move up and out of the ridge of the roof to cool it. There's very limited access from underneath / inside.
Yeah, so if you imagine the roof like this, and then you've got, you know, that ridge vent on top, you know, I'm hoping you can get in your attic and look up in there. There should be a space, and probably even blocking along the way where the plywood, you know, is nailed to it between the, you know, the rafters or the trusses. So if you can get up in there, you might have to get up in there with a flashlight even and look. And at a minimum, what you might be able to do, I'm gonna see if I can draw this, is, okay, so I'm gonna try to draw this. Oh, I have to learn how to use the whiteboard on this thing. So, so if this is your ridge, and you've got this ridge vent on top, if you go in your attic and look, if your plywood stops here and here, as much as you can, you may want to, you know, you might attack this from 1 or 2 ways. From the outside, maybe you can push some smaller mesh in under here. I know it's a very small space, you know, but in a perfect world, if you can get up in here and put the smaller mesh up inside here somehow, that would be the ideal. The only concern I would have here is that under here, if you can't get in front of the edge of the plywood or OSB material, the substrate, you know, to keep an ember from landing on the edge of that could be problematic. But, you know, that's something to take a look at. That's a challenge. That's a real challenge.
Roberta, just to let you know, it was kind of hard to see that notepad if you want to maybe put it closer to the screen or something.
That's kind of it. You know, if you can get up in backwards in here from underneath with some small mesh somehow, and, you know, keeping in mind you don't want embers to land on the edge of any wood like the plywood under there, or maybe from the outside you can get to it and you know, squash some mesh in from the outside up underneath. You know, ridges, honestly, they're the last part of the roof that gets completed. So best case scenario, you could get a ridge material that has a smaller mesh probably, and then pop those ridge shingles off, and then put the new vent, pull the old vent out, put the new vent on there, and then, you know, actually if the vent is your ridge, then you're golden. But there might be some places where you need to replace shingles. So yeah, that's an option too. Put, you know, replace it with a, you know, more fire safe ridge vent. That's a tough one.
Okay, well, those are all the questions.
Okay, so all right, so I'm gonna give you guys the bonus you've all been waiting for. Let's see, let me get.
I did have one comment,
Yes.
Roberta. So I was going to point out, if people are able to get an assessment in their little neighborhood. So say you have 3 or 4 houses together, that is shown to have a greater impact. Whereas if you're independent from all the other structures and environments, that's really valuable, but not as valuable as doing them in a group. So anyway, if you can encourage yourself and your neighbors to get together in that little group, that has bigger impact.
Yeah, good idea. Yeah, it's the economy of it with you having to get out there and do it.
Well, just, yeah, but also the fire mitigation aspects of it.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, yeah. You know, also with that said, it reminds me what I encourage people to do is, you know, if you've, it's a little harder now with COVID, but you know, do a work party, you know, and take turns, you know, weekend by weekend. It's like, oh, today we're gonna go do Martha's house, order a pizza, get a couple of 6 packs of beer, and do a work party where you all do a bunch of defensible space work, you know, and then just go through the whole neighborhood like that.
Yeah.
And then
drink afterwards, right, Roberta?
yes, yeah, definitely afterwards. Drink the water while you're working, and then consume the adult beverages after. Okay, so I'm going to share with you, I promise you guys a little treat afterwards. And Kaylin doesn't know I'm doing this, and neither does Stuart. So I'm going to go back to share screen. And then if you guys want to provide feedback on this is something Fire Safe Sonoma we're working on. Let's see, share sound.
I'm so curious what this is going to be.
Yeah, okay, so.
I can't take any more anticipation, Roberta.
Okay, so this is something we're working on. We hope to share with you guys. So Kaylin, you can see the screen, right? It looks like YouTube. Okay.
Yep.
All right, so here we go. I think. Give it a second. I hope it works.
Is this a world premiere, Roberta?
Kind of. I don't know. It may not work. Oh, I'm running too much video with the shoot. Yeah, it's not loading.
Well, if it doesn't work, we could always email to participants.
Oh, it's not fit for public consumption yet. This is the PSA I'm working on.
Oh, right. Oh, that's right.
Yeah. Oh, darn it. Let me try to make it smaller for a second and see if I can get it to go. I am so sorry, you guys. I don't think it's going to work for whatever reason. It's not loading. I can hit play all day. It's not going to work. Oh, well, you know. Anyway, you guys, thanks for attending. I apologize for us going overtime. Thanks for all 12 of you who hung out. And you know what? Why don't we do this, Kaylin? We'll send a link to this PSA to everybody who attended. Because I feel I don't want to shortchange them after making that promise. So, and if you guys want to provide feedback on this, it's a draft of a public service announcement we're working on. Stuart, I think Stuart's seen it already, so is Kaylin, and offered their feedback. I'll use you guys as a focus group to provide feedback before we put it out there, you know, in the general public. Anyway, thanks again for all you guys.
I thought you were going to announce Georgia or something.
Oh no, I'm in suspense. I can't wait to check.
Anyway.
But anyway, so thank you, Stuart, so much for helping us out.
Thank you.
And next time we do this, we might want to peel, you know, your presentation out into a separate one. Yeah, somebody recommended it, looks like. Thank you, Kaylin, as always, for all your help, you know, holding all this together. You're the glue that keeps this thing together. And all you folks that attended, thank you so much. I hope you liked it. And yeah, go forth and conquer. Do those projects. Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, we'll see you guys. Bye-bye. Sorry that didn't work. Shoot. All right. Thanks, Kaylin.